Welcome to another episode of the Manufacturing Executive Podcast. I'm Joe Sullivan, your host and a co-founder of the industrial marketing agency Gorilla 76. Okay, manufacturing leaders, I want you to raise your hand if you're the type that has struggled somewhere along the way with relinquishing control, handing off the job to your team and trusting it's gonna get done and done well. And yes, even without your hands in it. I'm talking about empowering your team to work in the business so you can spend your time working on the business. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm guessing most hands are up right now, and it's understandable. Our companies were born out of our vision and raised under our guidance, but they can't grow up and thrive if we don't give them a chance to do so without our constant supervision. I've got a fantastic conversation ahead for you today with an entrepreneur in the manufacturing ERP space that has been in this position before and now helps others to get out of it. So let's do this. Paul van Metre has spent his life pursuing and following his passions in the precision machining industry. After 17 years as co-founder and president of a machine shop, Pro CNC, Paul co-founded ProShop ERP, a software company that develops Industry 4.0 leading web-based and paperless ERP software for small and medium manufacturing companies in the metalworking industry. Paul has a passion for the SME community, connecting with and helping companies grow, prosper, and provide opportunities and employment in their communities. As a shop owner for 17 years and now a software provider to SMEs, Paul has deep roots in the machining community and a unique perspective based on his experience in the manufacturing supply chain. Paul, welcome to the show.
Joe, thank you for having me. I'm excited. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm feeling the same way. I think I discovered you on LinkedIn which is how I discover a lot of people these days, frankly, kind of just embedding myself in the manufacturing space. And naturally, you stumble across people who are there and active and have a perspective on things. And I really liked, some of the insights I saw you posting and thought, all right, we got to get Paul here on the show to talk about his experience and have since sort of learned about some of your passion. So I'm excited to get into this conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you. Me too.
All right, so Paul, you have got a classic entrepreneurial story, and I'd love for you to kick things off here by just telling our listeners how ProShop ERP came to be.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'll go back a little ways. You mentioned, I think, in the intro about I used to own a machine shop. So I started a machine shop straight out of college with some buddies that I went to college with. I did not ever plan to be an entrepreneur. I thought I would work at a big car company actually and design and build cars. When I was a kid, I studied engineering and thought that was my path. But fell in love with machining and manufacturing as we built a lot of our projects in school. We actually designed and built race cars for the Formula SAE competition, which is an entree for a lot of people into manufacturing. And we just loved it so much, we decided that we wanted to start a company together. So one of my partners owned a house with enough equity to take out a second mortgage. And that money was enough to rent a space, buy a Haas VF4, an old manual mill and lathe, and start looking for business. So that's what we did at the ripe old age of 23 or so, right out of college. And so that company, grew over the years. Eventually up to about 75 people and 30 plus machines. During the time that we grew that company, we couldn't find any software that we thought was worth buying to run our company with. Believe me, we looked. And so we eventually just started building something out of need for ourselves. And that eventually turned into ProShop. And we didn't plan on selling it to anyone else, but our biggest customer and then ultimately other companies started approaching us and asking us if we would sell our software to them, not just our machined parts. And so in 2016, we sold the machine shop and then launched ProShop in 2016. And so here we are now.
That's awesome. Good for you guys.
It's been fun. been a fun ride for sure.
Yeah, I bet. Well, it's got to just be a really good feeling I mean, you had a problem in your business, something that you realized a gap, right? In this need that you had, and you figured out the solution, you made it for yourself, and then all of a sudden realize, okay, well, I guess everybody else needs this too. I mean, I feel like it's how a lot of the best products and services are born, right?
Sure. Yeah. Often out of need for something on an internal team, and then they realize there's commercial value there. So yeah, that was us. But we, again, never planned it that way. If you'd asked me, when we were running our shop, if you'd one day be a software company, I would have said that's just crazy talk.
Yeah, it's interesting how things play out. Well, very
Yeah.
cool. Well, probably along the way here, Paul, is where you developed this passion. But you were talking to me recently about the idea of creating scalable business processes and why that's so important. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from your perspective, to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So a lot of shops are started by people that are technicians, right? They're experts in something. Maybe they're a journeyman level machinist. Maybe they're a programmer or both. But they're good at what their technical job is. And then they just open up a company and they start getting business in, and they just kind of roll right into, all right, this guy's sending us a job, let's get it out of the shop and make it. And they grow to a point where their lack of business processes become a major hindrance to growth, right? I think a lot of companies just don't think nearly enough about business process. They're just kind of winging it the whole time, and that can work when you're small, and it's probably highly efficient when you're small. But as you start to grow, things slip through the cracks. You forget to order this thing, or you thought this other person in your company was supposed to do that, but they don't really realize that's their job, and so they don't do that, and things start to fall apart, and just become frustrating and difficult. And a lot of shops spend a lot of time fighting fires, right? I was even talking to a customer of ours recently, and he said his shop used to be like a pirate ship. It was just, people running around doing stuff. But the more you think about developing repeatable and scalable business processes and focusing on those, and the result of those is a profitable business, that is a real key to scaling and growing a business.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with everything you said there. Something that my business partner, John, and I have faced many times over our 15 years of growing this business, which has grown from 2 to 20 people at this point. So we're still a small company, but when you're 2 people, you're literally doing everything. When you're 20 people, you're able to
Sure.
start to finally, specialize and remove things from your plate. But it's really tough to let go of the reins when this thing's your baby. And when
Absolutely.
you know that you can do it right because you've done it right, and now all of a sudden you've got to sort of relinquish control and trust other people to get things done. I mean, I still face it. 15 years in, it's still it's still a challenging thing to do. So, I guess my question for you as a follow-up here is, how can leaders of manufacturing organizations put themselves in a position to work more on the business and let go of the working in the business, right?
I appreciate it. That's a great question, and it's perfect because I read a book. My partners and I read this book pretty early on in our machine shop, called The E-Myth. I don't know if you've read that one, by Michael Gerber, but it is a really easy read, sort of told like a story, and the concept is that, kind of like I alluded to in the last question. Companies are often started by people that are experts in their craft, but they're not necessarily great at building companies. And so they just get deeply embedded. They're always working, in the company, right? They're machining parts, they're programming, they're taking orders, they're doing things, and they don't spend as much time working on the company. And so the way that the process of taking thinking more about business process, to tie it back to the last question as well, is that if you kind of analyze what you do on a daily basis, you can probably break it out into multiple different buckets of sort of job duties, right? When you're a small business, you're the salesperson, you're the janitor, you're the order entry person, you're customer service, you're the machinist, right? But as you grow and you can no longer do all those things, if you look and say, all right, well, when I'm doing sales, these are the things that I do to do sales, right? When I'm being a programmer, I'm doing these things. When I am doing accounts receivable and payable, when I'm being the bookkeeper, I'm doing these other things. And if you document what you're actually doing in each of those roles, think about it like switching hats, right? You have your salesperson hat, you got your machinist hat. As you task switch during the day, think about exactly what you're doing, write it down, and define that as a process. And the more you define that and make it clear so someone else can read that, look at it, maybe you make little videos about it, that allows you to then start hiring people into those roles and replacing yourself as the salesperson, replacing yourself as the estimator, as the janitor, as the accountant. And ultimately, your role should really be to completely replace everything you do. So you're no longer working in the business at all, and you're strictly working on the business, doing strategic stuff, doing the stuff you love the most, doing the stuff that's going to add the most value to your company, building those processes, and hiring a great team that will help you execute and elevate your company to that next level.
Yeah, that's a really good recommendation. I really like the way you described actually writing down that list. What are all the things you do? And I can remember doing that myself probably about 10 years ago, where it was like, all right, I mean, we were, a very small company at the time, and just writing all these things down and being like, all right, this is the one that needs to go first. And then it's got, it's got to be bookkeeping, right? Like I should not be keeping the books at my company as the owner of the company. Like, let's throw that to our accountant. Like, let's, and then just sort of chipping away one at a time. But if you prioritize those things and say, where am I really most needed? Where am I creating the most value? And you keep those things for longer until eventually you can, give up control of them. But I think it's a really good exercise for somebody to go through.
Yeah, and one of the main premises of that book that really, I think, just gelled for me in a visual way is the idea is that you are designing your company as if it were a prototype of a franchise business, right? So you only have one factory, one shop, one whatever it is that you are. But imagine that you decided to open a second location, 100 miles away or 1,000 miles away, right? If you aren't there on a daily basis to actually do all the work, how would someone even know what to do to replicate and provide the same service that you do in your facility to someone from somewhere else? So if you think about it like a franchise, like a McDonald's, right? Whenever you go to any McDonald's, the experience you're going to have more or less is going to be the same burgers, same fries, same processes. And that repeatable, consistent product and or service that you're delivering to your customer is a result of business processes, right? So without having those clearly defined for the people you're hiring to replace you in those roles, you're not going to have that consistency. So that was part of the book. I would definitely recommend anyone that has not read the E-Myth to go out and buy it. It's an easy read, but just the concept of a franchise prototype of a business, even if you only have one location, that makes a ton of sense to me. And then the other thing that's been on my mind recently is that there's a whole lot of shop owners that are in the baby boomer generation that are getting pretty close or even past sort of typical retirement age. And a lot of them are going to be faced with the idea of, well, what am I going to do with my business next, right? Am I going to sell it to my kids? If I don't have any kids that are interested in it, maybe to key employees or maybe to, some third party, altogether. And I think unfortunately, there's a lot of shops out there that are going to be in for kind of a rude surprise about how little their companies are actually worth, because the whole company is still wrapped up around them and what they are doing, and without the scalable processes, right? That let's say talking about a third party buyer, a strategic buyer, another shop or an equity firm or something even like that, right? if you can demonstrate that you have these good repeatable processes and the business is not just, reliant on you exclusively to get everything done. And every time a question comes up, someone comes to you and says, what should I do here? Right? If they know that, that's more valuable. And when, for a lot of shops out there that have been through, or companies that have been through things like an ISO audit, ISO 9000 or AS 9100 audit, when you go through the due diligence of selling a company, it's like an audit times 10. It's like on steroids. They are going to dig through every single thing in your company to make sure they're paying the right price. And they will, if they discover that you just are a mess of, running around in scraps of paper and spreadsheets and this and that, and without really good solid processes that other people are running, that business just doesn't have a lot of value besides the actual assets.
Yeah, you hit on a lot of really good stuff there. The other thing I think happens when you become really good at documenting the way you do things, or having very clear, well laid out processes, is the satisfaction inside of your company among employees and your teammates starts to rise too, because I've seen this in my company over the years. I don't think it matters what kind of business you run. When people don't understand who's responsible for what, who reports to who, when a certain thing happens, like, whose job is it to deal with this, or how do one person executes this process this way and this way, it creates a lot of, just confusion, which leads to people who just aren't content in their roles.
Yeah.
And then that trickles down to retention issues and just morale issues in the company. So there are so many side effects of having, being able to remove yourself from the business and being able to lay those processes out. It just touches so many parts of your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we were growing and bumping up across these pain points ourselves, we were fortunate enough that we had hired a software developer to build some software for us. And we were like, what, this is like, probably having some things fall through the cracks. So I thought you were supposed to do that. No, I thought you were supposed to do that. And so we started building, we're like, let's build a job description, job position module, and let's build an org chart, and let's build modules for all of our daily tasks and our business processes. And ultimately those fed really well into our ISO and AS 9100, because those are requirements to have that kind of stuff in there. But the way that we did it was just, it really helped us grow. And we had very, very low turnover in our, really high employee retention, high employee satisfaction. And I think you're right. And I hadn't really thought about it quite that way, but it was largely probably because everyone knew exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They knew what good performance looked like with all the metrics and the KPIs we set out. And ultimately, employees want to come to work, work with people that are well aligned with them culturally, do good work, feel proud of what they do, and know they're making an impact. And if you can lay out your business process and structure that way, people are going to love it.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, let's talk ERP a little bit. You run a great ERP software platform specifically for manufacturing shops, because there was a need for that didn't seem to exist, and which is why you wound up where you are now. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about where does ERP fit into this whole process of streamlining, or this topic of streamlining business processes and scalability.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I just had a conversation yesterday with a gentleman. He owns a machine shop in Wisconsin. Pre-COVID, about 75 people, down a little bit now, but he said he uses 13 different software products to run the company. From things with estimating and sales and order entry and cutting tool management and preventative maintenance and just all the different things, and I'm sure some of those are just spreadsheet systems they built or little mini databases or whatever. But when an ERP system, right, ERP, of course, is enterprise resource planning. It's designed to help run a company. But what we found when we did our research for our shop is that the software products out there, and it's a crowded space. You don't get me wrong. It's not like we were reinventing a new category, but the software products that we found that were designed for job shops and manufacturing shops like us, they did some things perfectly well, right? Estimating maybe and quoting, order entry, creating invoices, purchasing, but they left this huge middle section of where you're kind of done with the sort of office side of things and you print off a paper job traveler and it goes out into the factory, and then it's kind of a black hole, right? Now some have data collection stations and you could log in and log out of the job and say how many parts you've made, but there's a lot more nuance and detail that happens in a shop out there. And of course, in a manufacturing company, the value is generated on the shop floor. That's where you're taking raw materials, doing value-added processes, and making finished goods. And so that's really the meat and potatoes of a company. And you really need to have good business processes, I think, tied into software that make it really easy and transparent and reduce, overhead costs and let people just work on the actual value added part of making chips and making parts and doing things quickly. And these softwares that we looked at just didn't have those things. So we decided, again, to build our own. And we focused really heavily on that sort of manufacturing execution sort of side of things, as well as quality management. So we built a complete QMS system into ProShop as well. So sometimes we actually see, and sometimes you'll see it on our website, that ProShop is ERP, MES, and QMS. And it's actually a bunch of other acronyms too, CMMS and LMS and all sorts of these silly acronyms. But basically, trying to solve like what that guy in Wisconsin was dealing with 13 different software products and trying to pare it down to, ideally one or two, right? And so I think the right ERP in a company can dramatically help improve efficiencies, throughput, improve quality, all tied around business processes. Because ultimately, we think of ProShop as really, it's like an operating system for a shop. It is, you sort of plug things in on the front end, follow the process all the way along, and you're going to get good, profitable parts out at the end. So that's how a little bit I think about ERP as it relates to manufacturing.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, you kind of can see it at both extremes sometimes where, I see this in the world of marketing where there's a million pieces of software that do a million different things. And, finding one tool that does absolutely everything the way it needs to be done is tough, but there are tools out there like, HubSpot, for example, where like a lot of it is handled under one umbrella and done really well. We'll still pair it with other things here and there when when you need other tools for various things. But I'm thinking of all the stuff we do inside of that piece of software. And if we were running 13 different pieces of software, like, your manufacturing example, it would just be a mess. It becomes chaos. It's too hard to manage. People don't know what tool to use for what. So yeah, the idea behind what you guys have done seems pretty great.
Well, again, we just, and I actually think that because we had no manufacturing or ERP experience before we started our company, really, we didn't have preconceived notions about what ERP software should look like and be included, what kind of features. So we just went sort of logically through everything that we did. And we're like, okay, we need a page for this, a feature for that, a module for that, right? And it included, for a machine shop, and we've diversified a little bit further out. We have fab and weld shops and other companies and even some OEMs that use ProShop. But the core fundamental principle is that they're taking, they're manufacturing typically, high complexity, really value added products going through complex processes. And even more sweet spot in a regulated industry like aerospace, defense, medical. Because as our shop was getting more sophisticated and getting into these markets and had more discerning clients with more flow downs and needs, and We need to manage quality and our setups and our tools and make sure we always had everything at the right time. Nothing was missing. We just said, all right, let's build a feature for this. We just realized that we went to set up a job and we didn't have all the tools. All right, well, let's make a module for tools and making sure that feeds into purchasing. So you make sure you have them in advance before you go to do your job. And we just, because it was so organically built by people that didn't have a preconceived notion, but had a daily need, to get these problems solved. It just turned into a really interesting organic product that was just different than anything else out there.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any examples, Paul? Like I noticed you've got some videos, like testimonial or case study, success story type of videos on the ProShop website. Any example you could give that would sort of put into context for listeners the transformation that a company was able to go through, like pre and post implementation?
Yeah, I mean, we have, I think we're approaching 20 customer testimonial videos out there. So there's a lot of them, but one that I'm particularly just fills my heart with joy, to hear and talk to these clients talk about it. Small father and son kind of run shop. Father started it in his basement. Son joined right out of college. Small machine shop, about 15, 20 people in Connecticut. They used two of our competitor products in the past. They used one for a couple of years, then they realized that wasn't going to work, so they switched to another one, used that one for several years, but they were really sort of hitting their heads up against the ceiling on its capability, and realized that they were spending far more time making workarounds and spreadsheets to help, filling gaps they didn't have. So when they put ProShop in, within just a few months' time, and really for the whole year after putting ProShop in, they increased their revenue about 20% without any additional equipment, and even one less person in the overhead department. They got rid of a purchasing person they didn't need anymore. But the reason they improved that so much is because they got about 20% more throughput on their factory floor, right? Their setups were going smoother. Things were just flowing more quickly through the factory. They didn't have machines sitting and idle, waiting for tools or equipment or taps or gauges to show up that they realized they didn't need or they didn't have. And so, they increased their throughput by 20%. Their profitability went up considerably. Their on-time delivery performance went up by many, many points. They said for their main production business, they were basically hitting 100% on time, right? And before that, it was just constant firefighting, struggling to hit dates, constantly paying expediting fees to catch up on jobs that were late. In fact, that was a note. It wasn't even a thing that I had even ever thought about as like a return on investment. But they were the first ones that kind of clued me into this. They used to spend about $30,000 a year on expediting fees for like plating processes or outside processes or expediting material, or just paying like overnight shipping charges to bring in, something that they realized at the very last minute that they didn't have. So they were spending about 30 grand a year, and they almost entirely cut that to zero, right? So that cost alone was more than ProShop cost them, let alone, a 20% increase in revenue and throughput and profitability, and just just how much less friction they had, how much more they enjoyed their jobs, and company morale went up. Just all these incredibly positive things, coming out of using a system that was better designed for their business than what they were using before.
Well, congrats. It sounds like one of many success stories you've got, but that's just got to be the best feeling as a business owner to hear that, to get validation, right?
Yeah.
Like you can, when you see people's businesses literally changing, and which affects their lives and, their own livelihood, that's just the best feeling. So that's pretty cool.
It is. And particularly with machine shops and job shops like that are, making things from raw metals and materials, turning them into finished goods. They are literally at sort of the ground floor foundation of the entire economy, right? Mm-hmm. Everything, and I use this example all the time, right? You look around your space, everything that you can see was originally started with machining in some way or form, right? Whether it's that microphone or the sweatshirt you're wearing, that was made on a machine that's made up of lots of machined parts that were made by machine shops. And so not only can we improve the individual businesses and their local economies, growing more to hire more people, more machinists, but that's, if you do that enough times over thousands of shops, that's going to lift up the economy. And manufacturing jobs have the highest multiplicative effect of any other types of job, where one manufacturing job creates like 3 or 4 other jobs to support them, in service businesses. And so we believe it's incredibly important. It's an honor to work with our clients. I always used to love making really beautiful machined parts, and I got a lot of satisfaction out of that, but I get way more satisfaction out of making meaningful impacts to people's businesses.
Well, Paul, this was an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, I hope it provided some value to shops out there, a different way to think about their business a little bit, things that they can do to improve, even starting tomorrow. Because it's, again, lifting up, supporting manufacturing is just really important. Even coming out of COVID now, right? Manufacturing is leading the charge out of the recession. That pent up demand for things that people need to have made. And fortunately, it's getting strong right now. So I know not every sector equally, but it's great to see it and great to help be a part of it and support it.
For sure. Yeah. I seem to be seeing more and more, posted on LinkedIn and articles floating out there and in the news sources about just how well the manufacturing sector is doing right now, which is, I don't think any of us would have guessed it, going back 13, 14 months, that's where we'd be at this point. So it's good.
Yeah. A lot of job openings too. I see a lot of help wanted for machinists, which is great. Which is actually one little point, as most machine shops or companies that work in high-tech manufacturing know, it's incredibly hard to find people, right, that have the technical skills and the ability to do what you want to do. And you alluded to this earlier about, having a good culture and good business process so people don't have that friction at work. I see a lot of shops right now putting out job ads that say, hey, we have an opening for a machinist, come apply. And I can tell you that that's just not a winning formula, right? There are so many openings for so few people that you really got to up your game on recruiting and making your company just an incredible place to work and like a bright light in the night, with attracting people to you that want to just congregate and be part of your world. So think about if you are in the position where you're needing people. Actually, I think I even wrote a blog post about this recently. There's a lot you can do to kind of make sure that people are applying for your jobs rather than the jobs down the street. So think about what, from an outside perspective, what would draw someone to your company and make it look like a really incredible place to work.
No, that's great. It's funny. I can't seem to escape any of these podcast conversations without the manufacturing labor shortage coming up. It's everybody's talking about it. It's a very real thing. And I totally agree with you because we talk about this at Gorilla, being a company that does marketing for manufacturing companies. Like, it's a very similar thing with recruiting talent. Like, you're trying to get discovered, you're trying to earn trust and the attention of people that would be, good employees of your company. And yet you go to a majority of the careers pages on manufacturing organizations' websites, and it's like a few paragraphs of text and like a link to an external job board. It's like,
right.
That's how you're going to recruit people. Like, that's how that is the impression you want people to have of this being a good place to work. So I totally agree. You
should be selling your business to employees just as much as you're selling them to customers.
Absolutely.
If not more so.
Absolutely agree, especially in a time like this. So,
yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad you threw that little nugget in there. So, well, Paul, tell our audience how they can get in touch with you and how they can learn more about ProShop.
Sure. Well, our website is proshoperp.com. We also have a new website. I don't know if you've seen it personally. As far as branding and marketing goes, it's called loveyouerp.com. Kind of fun. It's all hot pink and beautiful, lots of hearts and cheesy stuff all over it. But that's fun to check out. And then I'm on LinkedIn, just Paul Van Metre, VANMETRE. I'm sure you'll include it in the show notes and whatnot. But yeah, I hang out on LinkedIn a lot, as you said.
That's awesome. I'm pulling up loveyourerp.com as you speak right now. I'm gonna have to take a look at that. Looks like
someone told me recently that he said marketing to machine shop owners using hot pink is a boss move. And I thought that was just a hilarious statement.
Hey, you're going to stand out. I'll tell you that much. So
yes. Yeah.
Very cool.
It was fun to put together.
Awesome. Well, Paul, this was really great. Really appreciate you doing this once again. So I guess we'll put a bow on it there. So
thanks for the time. I appreciate it. Take care. Have a good day.
Absolutely. And as for the rest of you, I hope to catch you on the next episode of The Manufacturing Executive.